The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning with news that would shatter everything Lillian Turner thought she knew about her future, informing her that her father's debts had consumed their Boston estate and left her with nothing but a hastily scrawled address to a distant uncle's ranch in Cherry Creek, Nevada. She stood on the train platform 3 weeks later, her fine silk gloves already grimy from the journey, staring at a landscape so brutally different from Massachusetts that it felt like stepping onto another planet entirely. The year was 1882, and the Nevada desert stretched endlessly before her, all burnt orange earth and scrubby vegetation beneath a sky so vast it made her dizzy. The stagecoach ride to the ranch took another 6 hours, jostling her bones and coating her throat with dust. When she finally arrived at the sprawling property, her uncle greeted her with awkward sympathy and an uncomfortable truth. He had written to her father months ago offering work, not charity, and he expected her to earn her keep like everyone else on the ranch. Lillian had never worked a day in her life, but pride kept her chin high as she nodded agreement. The next morning, she reported to the stables at dawn, dressed in the most practical clothing she owned, which still included a corset and petticoats beneath a riding skirt. The ranch hands were already at work, their voices carrying across the yard as they moved with easy confidence through tasks that looked deceptively simple. Her uncle introduced her to the foreman, a weathered man named Sullivan who looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "We need help mending the fence lines in the east pasture," Sullivan said, handing her a pair of work gloves that had seen better days. "You will be working with the crew." The crew consisted of 4 men, all of whom stopped their preparations to stare when she approached. She recognized the look in their eyes, that particular mixture of amusement and dismissal that she had seen occasionally in Boston when women spoke up at town meetings or dared to voice opinions about business. "This is Miss Turner," Sullivan announced. "She will be helping with the fencing today." A tall, lanky man with a crooked nose let out a low whistle. "That's so. Well, this ought to be entertaining." "Hush up, Garrett," Sullivan warned, but without much force. He turned to Lillian. "You know anything about mending fences?" "I am a quick learner," Lillian said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. The men exchanged glances, and she caught the ghost of smiles on their faces. They loaded up a wagon with tools and supplies, and she climbed aboard, sitting awkwardly on a pile of wire coils while the men settled into easy conversation that pointedly excluded her. The ride out to the east pasture took 30 minutes, and by the time they arrived, the sun was already climbing higher, promising a scorching day ahead. The fence line stretched across rolling scrubland, and several sections showed damage from what Sullivan explained was likely a combination of weather and wandering cattle. The work was immediately brutal. The men showed her once how to string the wire, how to use the tools to secure it, how to pull it taut without letting it snap back. Then they moved down the line, leaving her to manage her own section. Within an hour, Lillian's hands were screaming. The work gloves were too large and slipped constantly, and the wire bit through them as if they were paper. Her shoulders ached from pulling the stubborn metal into place. Her back protested the constant bending and stretching. But she gritted her teeth and kept working, determined not to give the men any more ammunition for their barely suppressed laughter. She could hear them talking as they worked, their voices carrying across the open space. They spoke about her as if she were not there, making jokes about Boston ladies and commenting on how long they thought she would last. Each word landed like a small cut, but she forced herself to ignore them, to focus only on the fence in front of her. By midday, when they broke for a brief meal, Lillian's hands were a disaster. The gloves had worn through in several places, and beneath them, Her palms were covered in angry red blisters. Some had already burst, leaving raw, weeping wounds. She tried to hide them as she accepted the canteen being passed around, but when she gripped it, she could not suppress a small gasp of pain. "Let's see them hands," Garrett said, reaching for her wrist. Lillian pulled back. "I am fine. Come on now, let's have a look." He grabbed her hand before she could protest again, pulling off the glove with a rough tug that made her eyes water. The other men gathered around, and for a moment she thought she saw genuine concern on their faces. Then Garrett started laughing. "Lord Almighty, would you look at that? Like raw meat." He turned to the others. "How much you want to bet she does not make it through the afternoon?" Another man, shorter and stockier, joined in. "I give her another hour at most. Those fancy Boston hands are not built for real work. Maybe she should head back to the house, take up needlework or something more suitable," a third added, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. Garrett was still holding her hand, displaying it to the others like a curiosity. "I have seen children with tougher skin." "What did you do all day back east, Miss Turner? Sit around eating bonbons?" The humiliation burned hotter than the pain. Lillian jerked her hand free and grabbed the ruined glove, shoving it back on despite the agony it caused. "I said I am fine. Let us get back to work." "Oh, she is a tough one," Garrett mocked. "All right then, princess. Let us see how long you last." They returned to the fence line, but now the men made a show of their commentary. Every time she struggled with a particularly stubborn section of wire, someone made a remark. When she had to stop and adjust her grip because of the pain, they laughed. When she finally managed to secure a post properly, Garrett walked over and made a show of inspecting it, pointing out every tiny flaw with exaggerated patience, explaining how a child could do better. The afternoon sun was merciless, and Lillian felt herself flagging. Her hands had gone past pain into a kind of burning numbness that was almost worse. Her water was running low, and her lips were cracked and dry. But she kept working, kept pushing, because the alternative was proving every one of their assumptions correct. She did not notice the rider approaching until his horse was almost upon them. Looking up through sweat-stung eyes, she saw a man dismounting with fluid grace, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair beneath a worn hat, and a face that might have been carved from the desert stone itself. He wore his authority like a second skin, visible in the way he moved, the way the other men immediately straightened and quieted when they saw him. This was Nathan Pierce, she realized. The man her uncle had mentioned owned the adjoining property and had a stake in several shared herds. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30 at most, with striking green eyes that took in the scene with uncomfortable perception. "Afternoon, Mr. Pierce," Sullivan called out, moving toward him. "Did not expect to see you out this way today." "I was checking the water access on the north boundary," Nathan said, his voice a deep drawl that carried easily across the space. "Thought I would swing by and see how the repairs were coming along." His gaze had already found Lillian, taking in her disheveled appearance and the awkward way she was holding the wire cutters. "Coming along fine," Sullivan assured him. "Got ourselves some extra help today." Nathan walked closer, and Lillian forced herself to stand straight despite the exhaustion weighing down her limbs. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, then his eyes dropped to her hands. She had given up on the gloves an hour ago, and her palms were fully visible, blistered and bleeding. Something shifted in his face, a hardening around the jaw. "What happened there?" "Just some blisters," Lillian said quickly. "Nothing serious." "Nothing serious," Garrett echoed with a snort. "Girl's hands look like they went through a meat grinder. We have been telling her all day she should head back, but she is stubborn as a mule." Nathan's gaze swung to Garrett, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's so. You have been telling her that, have you?" Something in his tone made Garrett shift his weight. "Well, yes, sir. Just being practical. She is not cut out for this kind of work. And you thought it was your place to make that determination. I just meant, what about you, Patterson?" Nathan turned to the stocky man. "You been offering helpful commentary too?" Patterson had the sense to look uncomfortable. "We were just joking around, Mr. Pierce." "Joking." Nathan repeated the word like it tasted foul. He looked at each of the men in turn, and Lillian saw them wilt under his scrutiny. "Where are her proper gloves?" "Those are the gloves Sullivan gave her," Garrett protested. "Same as anyone gets. Those gloves are 3 sizes too big and worn through." Nathan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Every man here started with equipment that fit them properly and hands already toughened by years of work. She is learning from scratch, and instead of helping her, you have been standing around making her a spectacle for your entertainment." "Now hold on," Garrett started, but Nathan cut him off. "I am not finished. This ranch operates on the understanding that every person pulls their weight and looks out for the others. That is how we survive out here. You want to work land like this, you need to be able to count on the person next to you, trust that they have got your back when things get hard. What I have been hearing for the last 10 minutes is 4 grown men mocking someone for having the guts to try something difficult and sticking with it even when it hurt." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lillian stood frozen, unsure whether to feel grateful or mortified by this unexpected defense. Nathan turned to Sullivan. "How much were you planning to pay these men for today's work?" Sullivan named a figure, confusion evident on his weathered face. "Consider it their severance," Nathan said flatly. "They are done here. I want them off both properties by sundown." The reaction was immediate and explosive. All 4 men started talking at once, protests and excuses tumbling over each other. Garrett stepped forward, his face flushed. "You cannot fire us over some jokes, Mr. Pierce. That is not right." "I am not firing you over jokes," Nathan said, his tone still eerily calm. "I am firing you because you are the kind of men who see someone struggling and decide that is an opportunity to feel superior rather than to help. I have no use for that kind of cowardice on my land or any land I have influence over." "Cowardice," Garrett's voice rose. "Now you wait just a minute, Sullivan. Escort them back to get their things," Nathan interrupted. "Make sure they are gone within the hour." Sullivan looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He jerked his head toward the wagon, and after a long, tense moment, the 4 men climbed aboard, shooting dark looks back at both Nathan and Lillian. The wagon pulled away, leaving her alone with Nathan Pierce in the middle of the desert, suddenly very aware of how isolated they were. Nathan removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, and Lillian caught a glimpse of frustration in the gesture. "I apologize that you had to endure that, Miss Turner. You did not have to fire them on my account," Lillian said, though her voice came out shakier than she intended. "I could have managed." "I am sure you could have," Nathan agreed, replacing his hat. "But you should not have had to." "May I see your hands?" She hesitated, then held them out. He studied them for a long moment, and she found herself studying him in turn. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the weathering that came from years in the harsh sun, the strength in his jaw, and the surprising gentleness in the way he turned her hands over to examine them fully. "These need proper cleaning and bandaging," he said finally. "And you need water and food. When did you last drink?" "I have some water left." He walked to his horse and returned with a canteen, pressing it into her hands despite her protest. "Drink all of it." The water was cool and sweet, and she had not realized how desperately thirsty she was until the first swallow. She drank half the canteen before forcing herself to stop, and when she lowered it, she found Nathan watching her with an expression that was almost sad. "You have never done any kind of labor like this before, have you?" he asked quietly. There seemed no point in lying. "No." "Why did you not say something? Why did you not ask for help or admit you needed different equipment?" Pride was a terrible thing, Lillian reflected. It kept your back straight but offered nothing when you were alone and hurting. I needed to prove I could do it. To them, those fools, to myself, she corrected softly. Everything I knew is gone. My father died in debt, our house was taken, and I have no skills or prospects. My uncle was kind enough to take me in, but I will not be a burden. I have to be able to work to earn my place. If I cannot do that, then what am I? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are someone with the courage to try something completely foreign and the strength to keep going even when it hurt and people mocked you for it. That counts for more than you might think out here." The kindness in his words threatened to undo her completely. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears, furious with herself for this weakness. What happens now? With the fence can wait. Right now you need medical attention. But the work will still be there tomorrow, Nathan said firmly. Can you ride? I can ride, Lillian said, grateful that at least this was something she knew how to do. Nathan's horse was a magnificent bay gelding, patient and well-trained. He helped her mount, his hands careful around her injured palms, then swung up behind her. Lillian stiffened at the sudden proximity, very aware of his solid presence at her back, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Easy," he murmured, and she was not sure if he was talking to her or the horse. "It is about a 20-minute ride to my place. I have medical supplies there." They rode in silence through the afternoon heat, and Lillian felt herself swaying with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept her upright all day was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Several times she caught herself starting to lean back against Nathan's chest, and each time she forced herself upright again, determined to maintain at least a shred of dignity. The third time it happened, Nathan said quietly, "You can lean on me if you need to. I promise I will not tell anyone." The gentleness in his voice broke through her last defenses. She let herself lean back, just slightly, and felt his arm tighten around her waist, steadying her. It was the first time anyone had offered her kindness without judgment since she had arrived in Nevada, and the relief of it was almost overwhelming. Nathan's ranch house appeared on the horizon, larger and more substantial than she had expected. It was built of stone and timber, sprawling comfortably across a small rise with corrals and outbuildings spread around it. He guided the horse to the main house and dismounted, then helped her down with careful hands. Inside, the house was surprisingly well kept, with sturdy furniture and clean floors. Nathan led her to the kitchen and pulled out a chair. "Sit. Let me get the supplies." He returned with a basin of clean water, cloths, salve, and bandages. Then he pulled up a chair across from her and gently took her hands again, laying them palm up on the table between them. The cleaning hurt badly, and Lillian had to bite her lip to keep from crying out as he carefully washed away the dirt and blood. But Nathan's touch remained steady and gentle throughout, his big hands moving with surprising delicacy. "You are lucky these are not infected yet," he said, applying salve that stung before it soothed. "But they could have been, easily." Working with dirty equipment, raw wounds exposed to all that dust and grime. "I know it was foolish," Lillian said. "I just did not want to give them the satisfaction of quitting." "It was not foolish," Nathan corrected, beginning to wrap her hands with clean bandages. "It was brave." "But there is a difference between bravery and martyrdom, Miss Turner. Out here, You need to know when to ask for help. Pride will kill you faster than anything else in this country," says the man who just fired 4 of his workers for mocking someone. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing unexpected warmth. That was not pride. That was standards. There is a difference. When he finished with the bandages, he went to the stove and began pulling together a meal. Lillian protested that she should help, but he waved her off. "You are injured. Let someone take care of you for once." The meal was simple but good. Beans and cornbread with coffee strong enough to strip paint. They ate in companionable silence, and Lillian felt herself relaxing slightly, the tension of the day finally beginning to ease. When they finished, Nathan leaned back in his chair and studied her across the table. "What did you do back in Boston?" he asked. "Very little of use, as it turns out," Lillian said with more bitterness than she intended. I played piano, I organized charity events and attended parties. I was being groomed to marry well, which was supposed to be my great contribution to the family. You did not want that. I did not want or not want it. It was simply what was expected." She looked down at her bandaged hands. "It all seems very far away now. Do you miss it?" Lillian considered the question seriously. "I miss knowing what was expected of me. I miss feeling competent, but the life itself. I'm not sure I ever felt truly alive there. Everything was so prescribed, so limited. Here, at least, I have the opportunity to become something different, even if I have no idea what that might be." Nathan nodded slowly. "This land has a way of stripping you down to what is essential. It is hard, but it is honest. You know where you stand always." "And where do I stand?" Lillian asked. "I just cost you 4 workers. Those men were going to cause problems sooner or later," Nathan said dismissively. "Better to find out now what kind of character they had, and you did not cost me anything. I made a choice based on my own values. Still, I appreciate what you did today. You did not have to intervene." "Yes, I did," Nathan said simply. "It was the right thing to do." They talked as the afternoon faded into evening, and Lillian found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. Nathan was an easy listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering observations that showed he genuinely cared about the answers. He told her about his own history, how he had come west 10 years ago with nothing and built his ranch through sheer determination and careful management. He spoke about the land with real love, describing the way the desert bloomed after rare rains, the clarity of the stars at night, the satisfaction of watching healthy cattle thrive in harsh conditions. "It is not an easy life," he admitted, "but it is mine. Every success, every failure, it all belongs to me. There is freedom in that." As the light outside turned golden, Nathan stood reluctantly. "I should get you back to your uncle's place. He will be wondering where you are." The ride back was slower, more relaxed. Lillian found herself dreading its end, not wanting to leave this bubble of kindness and understanding they had created. When they reached her uncle's ranch, Nathan helped her dismount and walked her to the door. "Thank you," Lillian said, inadequate words for everything he had done. For the rescue, for the medical attention, for the conversation, for all of it. "You are welcome," Nathan said. He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said earlier. What you did today took real courage. Do not let anyone make you feel otherwise." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, and Lillian watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, something warm and unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Her uncle was waiting inside, concern written across his weathered face. The story came out in a rush, though Lillian carefully downplayed her own suffering and emphasized Nathan's intervention. Her uncle listened with growing anger, particularly at his foreman's role in the situation. "Sullivan should have stopped it," he said. shaking his head. "I will have words with him tomorrow, and as for those men, good riddance. Nathan Pierce has always been a fine judge of character." "He was very kind," Lillian said quietly. Her uncle gave her a sharp look, but said nothing more, just sent her off to rest with instructions to take the next day easy. But Lillian did not want easy. She spent the evening soaking her hands in cool water and planning. She had learned something important today, something beyond her own physical limitations. She had learned that she wanted to stay, wanted to make a life in this harsh and beautiful place, wanted to prove herself capable. And more than that, she had met someone who saw potential in her rather than limitations, who had defended her without making her feel weak. The next morning, despite her uncle's protests, Lillian was up at dawn. Her hands were sore but manageable, and she had wrapped them carefully in fresh bandages. She found Sullivan in the barn and asked him directly where she could learn the skills she needed without putting herself or others at risk. Sullivan, properly chastened by her uncle's reprimand, suggested she start with simpler tasks to build up her strength and calluses. He set her to work cleaning tack, explaining the proper care of leather and metal. It was still hard work, but it was something she could manage with her injured hands, and it gave her the opportunity to observe and learn as the other ranch hands went about their business. Over the next week, Lillian threw herself into learning everything she could. She worked with the horses, started learning to rope, practiced her riding in the early mornings before the heat became oppressive. Her hands healed slowly, developing the calluses that would protect them. Her muscles adapted to the constant physical demands. She stopped wearing her corset and found that breathing became easier. She let her skin brown in the sun, abandoning the parasol that marked her as an outsider, and she thought about Nathan Pierce more than she wanted to admit. She saw him twice in passing during that first week, once at the general store in Cherry Creek, and once when he stopped by to speak with her uncle about a water rights issue. Both times, he asked after her hands and seemed genuinely pleased to hear about her progress. Both times, their conversations were brief, but left her feeling energized and seen in a way that was entirely new. On Saturday evening, her uncle mentioned that Nathan had invited them to dinner at his ranch the following day. "He wants to discuss a possible partnership on some breeding stock," her uncle explained. "You should come along. Do you good to see how a well-run operation works," Lillian agreed, trying to keep the eagerness out of her voice. She spent Sunday morning in a state of nervous anticipation, changing her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that was practical but flattering. Her hair, which had always been her vanity, she pinned up carefully, leaving a few curls loose around her face. Nathan's ranch looked even more impressive in full daylight. The house was surrounded by well-tended gardens, a rare luxury in the desert, and the outbuildings were all in excellent repair. Nathan himself came out to greet them, and Lillian felt her breath catch slightly at the sight of him. He had cleaned up for company, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His eyes found hers immediately, and the smile that crossed his face was warm and genuine. "Miss Turner, I am glad you could come. How are the hands healing?" "Much better, thank you." She held them up, showing that the bandages were gone, replaced by healthy pink skin and the beginnings of proper calluses. "Well done," Nathan said, and the approval in his voice made her flush with pleasure. Dinner was a revelation. Nathan was an excellent cook, producing a meal that rivaled anything she had eaten in Boston's finest restaurants. The conversation flowed easily between the 3 of them, moving from ranch business to politics to literature. Lillian was surprised to discover that Nathan was well-read, with strong opinions about everything from Dickens to the recent political upheavals back east. After dinner, her uncle and Nathan settled into serious discussion about breeding stock and shared grazing rights. Lillian excused herself and wandered outside, drawn by the spectacular sunset painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. She found herself in Nathan's garden, examining the carefully tended plants that somehow thrived despite the harsh conditions. She was admiring a flowering cactus when she heard footsteps behind her. "It is a night-blooming cereus," Nathan said, coming to stand beside her. "Only flowers a few times a year and only at night. You have to catch it at just the right moment." "It is beautiful," Lillian said. "How do you keep all this alive out here? Patience, attention, understanding what each plant needs and providing it as best I can." He paused, then added softly, "Some things thrive in harsh conditions if they are given the right support." Lillian turned to find him watching her, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. "Are we still talking about plants?" "I am not sure," Nathan admitted. "Miss Turner, I find myself thinking about you quite a bit since that day at the fence line. I keep wondering if you are settling in, if you are being treated well, if your hands are healing properly. I realize I barely know you, but I would like to change that, if you are amenable." The directness of it was startling and refreshing after years of Boston's elaborate social dances. "I would like that as well," Lillian said honestly. "You have been very kind to me, Mr. Pierce." "Nathan," he corrected. "Please." "Nathan," she repeated, liking the feel of his name in her mouth. "And you should call me Lillian." "Lillian," he said, and somehow he made it sound like music. They stood in the garden as the stars began to emerge, talking about everything and nothing. Nathan told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the challenges of water management in the desert, about his hopes to build something lasting. Lillian found herself sharing her own tentative dreams, the way this harsh land was beginning to call to something deep inside her, the satisfaction she found in mastering new skills. "I never expected to like it here," she confessed. "I thought I would hate every moment, that I would feel trapped and diminished. But instead, I feel like I am waking up for the first time." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Nathan said. "You are discovering who you actually are rather than who you were told to be. That is a rare gift." When her uncle emerged to say they should be heading back, Lillian felt a pang of disappointment. But Nathan asked if he might call on her the following weekend, and when she agreed, his smile was bright enough to rival the emerging stars. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Lillian had experienced in Boston. There were no chaperones hovering, no elaborate social rules to navigate. Instead, Nathan taught her the skills she needed to thrive in this new world, and in the process, they built something real and solid between them. He started coming by several times a week, always with some excuse about needing to talk to her uncle but really there to see her. He brought her proper work gloves that actually fit, showing her how to break them in so they would mold to her hands. He taught her to rope properly, standing behind her to adjust her grip and her stance, his hands warm and steady over hers. He showed her how to read the signs of weather in the desert sky, how to find water, how to move through this landscape safely. Every lesson was an opportunity to be close to her, and Lillian found herself living for those moments. The accidental brush of his hand against hers. The way he would steady her with a hand on her waist when she lost her balance. The sound of his laugh when she made a joke. The serious attention he paid when she spoke about things that mattered to her. They talked for hours about everything imaginable. Nathan wanted to know about her life in Boston, and though those memories felt increasingly distant, she found herself sharing stories that made him laugh or shake his head in disbelief at the elaborate social structures she described. In turn, He told her about his own past, about growing up on a failing farm in Missouri, and deciding at 20 that he would rather take his chances in the West than slowly starve watching his family's land be taken piece by creditors. "I arrived in Nevada with $50 and a good horse," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset. "Worked as a cowhand for 5 years, saved every penny, learned everything I could. When the opportunity came to buy this land, I took it, even though everyone told me I was crazy. The water rights were uncertain, the grazing was marginal, and the previous owner had run it into the ground. But you made it work," Lillian said, looking out over the prosperous spread before them. "I did, through stubbornness more than intelligence, probably." He turned to look at her, his green eyes serious in the fading light. "I tell you this because I want you to understand something about me. I do not give up on things I believe in. When I commit to something or someone, it is completely. I do not know how to do anything halfway." The intensity in his voice made Lillian's heart race. "That sounds like a warning." "Maybe it is," Nathan said quietly. "Or maybe it is a promise. I am falling in love with you, Lillian Turner. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but that does not make it any less true. You should know that before we go any further." Lillian stared at him, her mind reeling. In Boston, such a declaration would have been scandalous, far too direct and emotional. Here, under the vast Nevada sky with the desert stretching endlessly around them, it felt exactly right. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, and watched joy break across his face like sunrise. Nathan reached for her hand, careful as always of her still healing skin, and brought it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was gentle and reverent, and Lillian felt it all the way to her toes. "May I court you properly?" he asked. "With the intention of marriage, if you will have me." "Yes," Lillian said, and then found herself laughing at the sheer, unexpected happiness of it all. "Yes, absolutely yes." Nathan pulled her into his arms, and Lillian went willingly, tucking her head under his chin and feeling the solid strength of him surrounding her. They stood like that as the stars emerged one by one, and Lillian thought about how strange life was, how catastrophe and loss had led her to this moment, to this man, to this wild and beautiful place that was becoming home. Her uncle, when informed of Nathan's intentions, was delighted. "Nathan Pierce is one of the finest men I know," he told Lillian, "and I have seen the way he looks at you, girl, like you hung the moon and stars. You could do far worse." "Do you think I am making a mistake?" Lillian asked, suddenly uncertain, "choosing this life? It is so different from everything I knew." Her uncle considered the question seriously. "I think you already chose this life the moment you picked up those fence tools and kept working despite the pain and mockery. Nathan is just a part of that choice, and a good part at that. But you need to be sure, Lillian. This land is hard on women. It will age you fast, work you to the bone, test you in ways you cannot imagine. You need to be certain this is what you want." Lillian thought about Boston, about the suffocating predictability of her old life, about the feeling of being decorative rather than useful. Then she thought about the satisfaction of mastering a new skill, the beauty of a desert sunrise, the way Nathan looked at her like she was capable of anything. "I am certain," she said. The engagement was announced in late October, and the wedding was set for December, giving them time to prepare properly. Nathan wanted to do things right, to give Lillian the celebration she deserved. The small church in Cherry Creek was decorated with winter wildflowers and ribbons. The whole community turned out, ranchers and townspeople alike gathering to witness the union. Lillian wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself with help from the local seamstress, practical enough for her new life but beautiful in its simplicity. When she walked down the aisle and saw Nathan waiting for her, his eyes bright with emotion and love. She felt a surge of absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but when Nathan slipped the ring on her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all their days, Lillian heard the deeper promise beneath the words. He would support her, challenge her, stand beside her through whatever came. And when she made her own vows, she meant every word with a fierceness that surprised her. The celebration afterward was lively, with music and dancing and food that the whole community had contributed. Lillian danced with her uncle, with various ranchers and townsmen, but it was the dances with Nathan that made her feel like she was floating. He held her close and whispered things that made her blush and laugh, talking about their future, about building a life together, about the family they would create. As the evening wound down, they rode back to Nathan's ranch, which was now her ranch too. Lillian looked up at the vast expanse of stars, brighter than anything she had ever seen in Boston, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the strange journey that had brought her here. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, Nathan treating her with a gentleness that made her fall even more deeply in love with him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Nathan traced idle patterns on her arm. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I am happy," Lillian said simply. "Truly, deeply happy in a way I am not sure I have ever been before." "Good," Nathan said, pulling her closer. "Because this is just the beginning, Lily. We have got a whole lifetime ahead of us." The months that followed were a period of adjustment and growth. Lillian threw herself into learning everything she needed to know about running a ranch. Nathan was an excellent and patient teacher, but he also made sure she learned from others, hiring experienced hands who could show her different techniques and approaches. She learned to read cattle, understanding their behavior and needs. She became skilled at doctoring sick animals, developing a reputation for gentle competence that made even the most skittish creatures calm under her hands. She learned the business side of ranching too, poring over ledgers and accounts, understanding the economics that made the difference between success and failure. But she also carved out her own spaces and projects. She expanded the garden, experimenting with different plants and techniques, until she had created an oasis that provided fresh vegetables year-round. She started a small breeding program for chickens, developing a flock that was hardy enough for the desert climate and produced reliably. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to sew and mend, to manage a household in conditions far different from anything she had known in Boston. Nathan watched her transformation with obvious pride and love. They worked side by side most days, partners in every sense of the word. They had disagreements sometimes, usually about ranch management decisions, but they learned to talk through their differences and find compromises that satisfied them both. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk about their day, about their dreams and plans. Nathan wanted to expand the ranch, to build it into something that could support not just them but future generations. Lillian wanted to start a school in Cherry Creek, having seen how few educational opportunities existed for children in the area. "You would be an excellent teacher," Nathan said when she first mentioned the idea. "And God knows this community needs one, but are you sure you want to take on that much?" "I am not sure about anything except that I want to try," Lillian admitted. "I've been given so many opportunities to learn and grow since I came here. I want to help provide that for others." Nathan kissed her forehead. "Then we will make it happen. Whatever you need, we will find a way." By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving beyond even Nathan's optimistic projections. The cattle were healthy, the water rights issues had been resolved favorably, and they had formed strong partnerships with neighboring ranchers that benefited everyone. More than that, Lillian had become an integral part of the community, known for her kindness and competence. And she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, small signs that she initially dismissed before the truth became undeniable. When she told Nathan, he swept her up in his arms despite her laughing protests, spinning her around the kitchen with pure joy on his face. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Lillian asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Nathan said, setting her down gently and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I have ever wanted. You, a family, a life we have built together. I could not be more grateful." The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat was oppressive during the summer months when she was at her largest, and the physical demands of ranch life did not stop just because she was carrying a child. But Lillian was strong now, her body hardened by 2 years of constant work, and she refused to be treated as fragile. Nathan hovered anyway, his protectiveness increasing as her due date approached. He tried to forbid her from riding, from lifting anything heavy, from working in the garden during the hottest parts of the day. They had their first serious fight when he suggested she should stay in bed for the last month. "I am pregnant, not dying," Lillian said with exasperation. "Women have been having babies while doing far more strenuous work than this since the beginning of time." "But they are not you," Nathan said stubbornly. "You are carrying our child, Lily. I cannot stand the thought of something going wrong." Lillian softened at the fear underlying his insistence. She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly, where their baby was performing its usual evening acrobatics. "Feel that. That is a strong, healthy baby in there, and I am strong and healthy too. I promise I will be careful, but you have to trust me to know my own limits." Nathan pulled her into a careful embrace. "I do trust you. I am sorry. I am just terrified something will happen and I will lose you both." "You will not lose us," Lillian promised. "We are tougher than we look, this baby and I." She went into labor on a cool evening in March 1884, and Nathan immediately became useless with panic. Lillian found herself having to comfort him between contractions, assuring him that everything was normal and he needed to please go get the midwife and stop looking like he was about to faint. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nathan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, his face drawn with worry and exhaustion. When their son finally arrived with a lusty cry that echoed through the house, Nathan had tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Lillian's chest. "Healthy and strong." Lillian looked down at her son, overwhelmed with love so fierce it was almost frightening. He was perfect, from his shock of dark hair to his tiny, grasping fingers. When Nathan leaned over to look at his son for the first time, the expression on his face was something Lillian knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "Hello, little one," Nathan whispered, carefully touching one tiny hand. The baby immediately gripped his finger and Nathan let out a shaky laugh. "He is perfect, Lily. Absolutely perfect." They named him Marcus after Nathan's father, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Nathan was a devoted father, involved in every aspect of his son's care in ways that scandalized some of the more traditional ranchers' wives. But Lillian loved watching him with their baby, seeing this strong, capable man turn gentle and patient as he changed diapers and walked the floors during fussy nights. Marcus was only 6 months old when Lillian discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Nathan's reaction was more measured, though no less joyful. 2 babies in 2 years, he said, shaking his head with a grin. We are not wasting any time, are we? Apparently not, Lillian agreed, tired already just thinking about it. Their daughter, Clara, arrived in the spring of 1885, an easier birth than her brother's. She was smaller and quieter, with her mother's light hair and her father's green eyes. Marcus, still a baby himself, was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to touch her and watch her sleep. The years that followed were full and demanding. Lillian juggled the needs of 2 small children with the ongoing work of the ranch and her growing involvement in community affairs. She had finally opened her school in Cherry Creek, teaching 3 days a week with help from another educated woman who had moved to the area. The school was small, just a single room in an old building near the church, but it was making a real difference in children's lives. Nathan continued to expand the ranch, his careful management and innovative approaches making them increasingly prosperous. But he always made time for his family, turning down opportunities that would have required extended time away. His priorities were clear, and Lillian loved him all the more for them. When Marcus was 3 and Clara was 2, they had another scare. A prolonged drought had turned the already harsh desert into something nearly apocalyptic. Water became scarce, cattle died, and tempers frayed as ranchers competed for increasingly limited resources. There were nights when Lillian lay awake worrying about whether they would lose everything they had built, but Nathan's earlier work on securing solid water rights paid off. Their ranch had access to a deep well that continued producing even when other sources dried up. And rather than hoarding that resource, Nathan worked out agreements to share access with neighbors, building goodwill and community ties that would serve them well in the years ahead. We survive together, or we do not survive at all, he told Lillian when she asked if he was sure about the sharing arrangement. I refuse to become the kind of man who prospers while his neighbors suffer. The drought eventually broke with spectacular storms that turned the desert briefly into a sea of wildflowers. Lillian took Marcus and Clara out to see it, wanting them to understand the beauty and resilience of the land that was their heritage. By the time Marcus started school at age 6, he was already confident on a horse and knew the basics of ranch work. Clara was more interested in the garden and the animals, spending hours helping her mother tend plants and bottle feed orphaned calves. They were good children, happy and secure, growing up in a home full of love and purpose. Lillian's school continued to grow, eventually requiring a larger building and a second teacher. She loved the work, loved seeing children's faces light up as they mastered reading or mathematics, loved knowing she was giving them tools that would expand their possibilities in life. Some of the students came from families who had initially been skeptical of education, especially for girls, and convincing them of its value was an ongoing effort. One evening, when Marcus was 8 and Clara 7, a former student came by the ranch. She was now 18, about to head east to attend a teacher's college on a scholarship Lillian had helped her secure. She wanted to thank Lillian for encouraging her to pursue education despite her family's initial resistance. "You changed my life," the young woman said earnestly. "You made me believe I could be more than just someone's wife or someone's mother. Not that those things are not important," she added quickly, "but you showed me I could choose what I wanted to be." After she left, Lillian sat on the porch with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the impact of her work. Nathan found her there and pulled her into his arms. "You should be proud," he said. "Look at everything you have built, Lily. The school, this ranch, our family. You have created so much good in the world." "We created it together," Lillian corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." Nathan kissed her temple. "Partners," he said simply. "Always." The years continued to pass, marked by both joys and sorrows. Lillian's uncle died peacefully in his sleep when Marcus was 10, leaving his ranch to his foreman with a generous bequest to Lillian. They used the money to fund a proper school building with multiple rooms and a small library, a resource the whole community could access. Marcus grew into a serious, thoughtful young man, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. He had his father's eye for cattle and his mother's head for business, a powerful combination. Clara was more creative, with a talent for drawing and an interest in botany that led to long discussions with her mother about plant cultivation and adaptation. When Marcus was 16 and Clara 15, Nathan suffered a serious injury when a horse threw him, and he landed badly. For 3 terrifying weeks, Lillian thought she might lose him. But Nathan was as stubborn about living as he was about everything else, and he slowly recovered, though he walked with a slight limp afterward. The incident sobered them both, a reminder that life was precious and uncertain. They had always been affectionate, but after Nathan's recovery, they grew even closer, treasuring the quiet moments together and the life they had built. Marcus married at 23, choosing a capable young woman from a neighboring ranch who was as tough and smart as she was beautiful. Their wedding was a grand affair, bringing together families from all over the territory. Watching her son pledge his life to his new wife, Lillian thought about her own wedding day, about how young and uncertain she had been, about how far she had come. Nathan slipped his hand into hers during the ceremony, and when she glanced at him, she found him watching her rather than the couple at the altar. The love in his eyes was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered so many years and challenges together. Clara took longer to settle, spending several years teaching at schools throughout the territory, before finally returning home at 25 with a botanist she had met in Carson City. He was a gentle, scholarly man who fit surprisingly well into ranch life, his research into drought-resistant plants proving valuable to the entire community. By the time Lillian turned 50, in 1895, she and Nathan had 5 grandchildren, ranging in age from infant to 10 years old. The ranch had expanded significantly, now one of the most successful operations in Nevada. The school had grown into a proper educational institution, with multiple teachers and students who came from all over the territory. Lillian looked back on her life sometimes with amazement, thinking about the terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in Cherry Creek 13 years ago. That woman had been lost and broken, stripped of everything she thought defined her. But she had found something far more valuable in the harsh desert, in the work that calloused her hands and strengthened her spirit, in the community that had become her family, and most of all in the man who had seen her potential and helped her become who she was always meant to be. She and Nathan still worked the ranch together, though they had competent help now and could afford to take things a bit easier. They spent more time on the porch in the evenings, watching the desert sunset and talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the deep companionship of a long marriage. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked one evening, out of nowhere. "Giving up your old life?" "Sometimes I think about how different things would have been for you if your father had not died, if you had stayed in Boston and married some wealthy merchant or lawyer." Lillian considered the question seriously, as she always did when Nathan asked her something important. "I regret that my father died," she said finally. "I regret that he suffered, that he felt like a failure at the end, but regret coming here, regret this life we have built together. Never, not for a single moment, even at the beginning when those men were mocking you and your hands were raw." "Especially then," Lillian said, "because that was when I learned I was stronger than I thought, when I learned that the person I was raised to be was not the only person I could become. when I met a man who saw past my blistered hands and society polished to whatever was underneath." Nathan pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one. Lillian thought about all the moments that had brought them to this point. The ache of her blistered hands and the even sharper ache of humiliation. Nathan's fierce defense and gentle care. The slow building of trust and love. The joys and sorrows, the triumphs and setbacks, the ordinary dailiness of a shared life. "I love you," she said quietly. "I have loved you from almost the beginning, but I love you more now, deeper and truer, for everything we have been through together." "I love you too," Nathan said. "You are the finest thing that ever happened to me, Lillian Pierce. The absolute finest." They were still sitting there when Marcus found them an hour later, coming to discuss some ranch business. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the sight of his parents wrapped in each other's arms beneath the stars, and quietly backed away without disturbing them. He had seen this 1,000 times before, this casual intimacy that was as much a part of the ranch as the cattle and the desert. And he hoped he and his own wife would be like that someday, still finding comfort and joy in each other after decades together. As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Lillian gradually stepped back from the daily management of the ranch, passing the reins to Marcus while staying involved in major decisions. They spent more time traveling, visiting Clara and her family in Carson City, taking trips to San Francisco to see the ocean and experience the rapidly modernizing world beyond their desert home. But they always returned to the ranch, to the landscape that had tested them and shaped them and witnessed their love story. The house they had shared for so many years was full of memories, every room holding echoes of laughter and conversation, of children growing up and grandchildren visiting, of quiet mornings and companionable evenings. When Nathan turned 60, in 1902, they threw a party that brought together friends and family from across the state. Lillian watched her husband move through the crowd, still strong and vital despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face, and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. They had been given something rare and precious, this long partnership, this deep love, and she knew never to take it for granted. That night, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, they sat on their porch one more time. The moon was full, painting the desert in silver light, and Lillian leaned against Nathan's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically, a gesture repeated so many times it had become instinct. 20 years, Nathan said softly. 20 years since I saw you struggling with that fence, hands bleeding, pride keeping you upright. 20 years since you fired 4 men and sat me down in your kitchen to bandage my wounds, Lillian added. Best decision I ever made, Nathan said. Which one, firing them or bandaging me? Both, all of it. Every choice that led to this moment right here. Lillian tilted her face up for a kiss, which Nathan provided gladly. Even after 2 decades, his touch could still make her heart race, still make her feel cherished and desired and deeply known. Here is to the next 20 years, she said. And the 20 after that, Nathan agreed. And however many more we are granted. I intend to love you until my last breath, Lillian Pierce. Good, Lillian said, because I intend to hold you to that. They sat beneath the stars, 2 people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. The ranch land stretched around them, prosperous and peaceful. Their children and grandchildren were happy and healthy, building their own lives while carrying forward the values they had been taught. The community they had helped shape was thriving, with opportunities for education and growth that had not existed when Lillian first arrived. It was not the life either of them had been born to, but it was the life they had chosen and created together. marked by hard work and deep love, by challenges met and overcome, by the daily choice to stand beside each other through whatever came. And as they finally rose to go inside, Nathan took Lillian's hand in his, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. Her hands were no longer soft or unmarked, but strong and capable, telling the story of everything she had learned and built and become. Nathan brought her hand to his lips, kissing the calluses there with reverence, and Lillian smiled, thinking about how far she had come from that first brutal day with the fence wire. Her blistered hands had healed long ago, replaced by strength and competence. The ranch hands who had mocked her were distant memory, while the cowboy who had defended her and taught her gently was her beloved husband, her partner in all things, the great love of her life. They had built something remarkable together in this harsh and beautiful land. And as they walked into their home, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Lillian knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it to arrive at this place of deep contentment and abiding love. The desert night wrapped around them, full of stars and promise, just as it had on that first evening when Nathan had looked at her blistered hands and seen not weakness but courage. Just as it had on countless evenings since, witnessing their laughter and conversation, their quiet companionship and passionate connection. And the night would continue to witness their love for many years to come, a love that had begun with an act of kindness and grown into something powerful enough to shape not just two lives but an entire community, a love that would echo through the generations that came after them, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to see the best in each other and work together toward a shared future. This was their story, written in calluses and cattle, in children and community, in the daily choice to honor and cherish each other through whatever life brought. It was a story of transformation and resilience, of finding unexpected love in an unlikely place, of building a life that mattered. And it was, in every way that counted, a story with a happy ending.